Right. Okay. Well, I think I'll get underway while folks are finishing off there. So, okay. Well, welcome to week 8. And first of all, just a simple statement of where we're at. Of course, we didn't have a lecture live session last week. We had a drop-in chat session, which was very, very nice. I enjoyed it enormously. It was very nice to connect with some of you. So last week's topic, finance, I haven't forgotten about that. You're going to get some video on demand material, frankly, the last week in particular, with the confluence of various quizzes and administrative deadlines and lots of things, and me catching up on editing past live sessions and putting them all up for several courses. It's been a bit of a lower priority to put the finance video on demand stuff up, because I knew most of you would be doing the quiz preps. And I'll say something about that in a moment. And the quiz covers up to week 6. Okay. So we will have another quiz next week, and that will cover finance and branding material. And I'll give you an update about that via email. But the intention is to launch the quiz as planned after the class on the Wednesday. It'll probably later on the Wednesday evening, and then to close it off Friday 5 p.m. As I've said in an email to everybody, my thinking about Friday 5 p.m. is, first of all, to get people in this COB mindset, okay, close of business. But also in some societies and some cultures, they draw a very sharp delineation between on and off. You know, in the Scandinavian context, there's a very clear distinction between working and not working. People work very efficiently during their working hours, and then when they're off, they're off, okay? Also, having spent a year in Israel, I kind of came around to the idea of Shabbat, the Sabbath, where you have a day off and you don't work. And that forces you to be much more productive beforehand. Okay, so I'm a bit of a proponent of at least a Shabbat-like dinner on a Friday night, which gives a bit of a closure to the week. Okay, of course, if you're Muslim, Friday prayers most significant, so you tend to finish up earlier. So some people finish up, of course, on a Thursday, so a different sense of the week, or work up until Friday lunchtime, and then can get to the mosque for the key afternoon prayers. So we have different rhythms of life, and modern society in general, with digital connectivity, work tends to spread into everything else. And I'm very much like that, but I don't mind that personally, because I'm very privileged in that I have a job I very much like. Research-wise, I get to do exactly the things that interest me, and the teaching interests me. So I don't mind work and the rest of life being one big mashup. But if you don't like your job as much, or if you don't like what you're studying as much, it's very nice to sharply divide it, to delineate it, to draw some boundaries. Okay, so hence the 5 o'clock Friday thing rather than midnight Friday. So be careful on that, especially those of you who are taking the Designing Corporate Communications intermediate course as well. I know a few of you overlap, and actually there, because the cutoff has actually been, it was last night, and I made it 23:59, so don't mix the two up. A couple of other things just about the quiz. Those of you who haven't done it, it says very clearly on the quiz, but one student who is very familiar with Moodle from another place alerted me to the fact that she didn't expect it to work the way it did. Very importantly, this is a summative kind of test, okay? So it's, I'd like to have it very much formative as well. But ultimately, the primary objective is to give you an incentive to cover the work, and to see if you've got on top of some of that stuff. So you go through the test in a unidirectional way. Okay, so there's a question, you answer the question, the next one comes up, you can't back up. Now, there is a flag function. Those of you who've used Moodle in high school, for example, might be in the habit of flagging a question and going back to it. But you can't do that in the way this is set up. Actually, at the end, it does offer you a kind of an opportunity to go back, but only to go back to the very last question. So it's kind of pointless. Okay, so you go through one question at a time, and the order you get the questions are randomly shuffled. Okay, so it's a random order. So if a person next to you is doing the quiz, and I hope that's not how it's going to be done, you'll actually get the questions in a different order. Why have I done it this way? Really quite straightforward, just to make it rather mendoxai to collaborate with other people, okay? I really do want you to be doing this as a solo endeavor. Of course, I'm not stupid. You can screenshot individual questions and whatnot. But the way we do it this way, it means that at least one person has to run through the exam and then be the generous person who pastes it all together and shares it. So I suspect that in itself will be a significant disincentive to collaborative endeavors. So I would much rather just simply to make the quiz completely formative. To every time you answer a question, it tells you whether it's right or wrong and what the correct answer is. But of course, that just presents some other problems. So it is a compromise, and unfortunately, this is what COVID-19 has forced us to do. Normally, I would do a midterm and a final under exam conditions, mark sheet based, a couple hundred people all fill out their mark sheets in the same classroom. We run them through a big scanner and we give you the results back in a week or two, but we obviously can't do it that way. And as a consequence, I've also significantly increased the weighting of other items, which frankly is a lot more work for me. But that's what it's all about this semester, okay? I'm delighted to see that many of the groups are very, very lively. I get statistics on degrees of interaction there. I am a little bit concerned. I can see that there is a very big asymmetry of effort and contribution. I'm seeing that some people are very active in their groups and whatnot, and that doesn't apply to everybody, okay? You do need to understand that at the end of the semester, Moodle does provide some very detailed metrics to me, okay? Actually, I kind of feel a little bit like 1984 Big Brother in a way, but I guess what's really interesting with the combination of Moodle and going completely online is up until now, professors have been kind of able to pretend that all the students were studying equally and equally contributing. And when we got worried that maybe there was some unfairness in the group work, we just do a peer assessment and whatnot. Now, of course, we get actually much more concrete data. You know, when people do things, how often they access everything on the site, how many posts they make, responses to classmates' posts, all of those kinds of things. So you are leaving a very substantial digital footprint or lack thereof, okay? And that's not just in this course, it's any professor who's using Moodle actively, and of course everyone is because we've gone virtual. So be very, very alert to that. Finally, just in terms of workload expectations, right, is that data actually valuable? Is that data actually valuable? How many groups are actually using Moodle for things? Well, good point. Some groups have clearly taken it off Moodle, and that's completely fine. And I've encouraged people to do that, and that's where the peer assessment thing is fine. But there are some groups where I see some people have had what we call actions, 70 or 80 actions, 20, 30 posts, and other people have had 2 actions, no posts, okay? So the data group by group, it's very obvious to me which groups are using the forums online to collaborate and which ones have taken it elsewhere, okay? So generalized low-level activity, I assume they've gone elsewhere, okay? When I see very high levels of activity from some people and none from others, that raises questions. So, of course, the final peer evaluation will be an opportunity for you to state your case. By the way, I will also add a final item at the end of the semester, which is a kind of like a plea, not a bargain, because I don't bargain, but a plea mechanism. So if people can provide extenuating circumstances to me, you know, went swimming and had both my arms bitten off by a shark and couldn't use a keyboard or something like that, you know, so if you come up with some more or less credible story, then I will take that into consideration. I think I said at the beginning of the semester, I say it in every class, that this is my job. It's a bit of a labor of love for me, but in the end, I also do get paid in a stable kind of way. So I'm pretty used to students being pretty indifferent to what I say and do. On the other hand, I really take a fairly tough stance on students who let their fellow classmates down. So it's all about the collegiality. So you're in it together, okay? So that's the critical criteria there, okay? And those of you who are, maybe have heard about me in my other classes, know that I do take that quite seriously. That for me, it's really about the engagement. And just one more thing, just in terms of workload expectations. And this is not just me. This is the Ministry of Education, no Monkasho speaking. Monkasho's policy is quite explicit. One credit per semester should be 45 hours of work. Okay. Now, we scarcely ever really get to that in reality, because actually Monkasho lets the universities get away with it too. Technically, each class should be 2 hours, but they say, okay, as long as you do kind of 90 minutes, as long as you do 15, 90 minutes, it's kind of okay. Monkasho's basic guidelines, if you do a quick Google of it, you'll find this, is that Monkasho work on an assumption of a 2-for-1 ratio. Every 1 hour of class contact, you should be doing an additional 2 hours outside the classroom. Okay, so Monkasho would be saying for a 2 credit point course, you should be 2 hours of contact. We only actually give you an hour and a half. Okay, and as a consequence, you should be doing twice that yourself out of the classroom. So you can do the basic sums on that. Okay, so you should be doing a total of 6 hours a week. That's assuming a 15-hour semester was squashed it to 12. Okay, I don't go that far, because I think if we let off 30 minutes a week on a similar proportion, we should let you off an hour. I kind of think that's the rationale. So I'd like to think you would see this as over a 15-week semester. This is only a 12-week semester. It's a bit more intense. You would think of, say, each comma as equivalent of 5 hours work a week. Okay. And over a 15-week, that comes up to about, 36 hours a week, so a bit more intense, so 40 hours a week. So that actually is just exactly what I had when I was a first-year student at the University of Queensland. We took 4 courses, and they told us each course, they said was 10 hours equivalent work. So they said this is like a full-time job, so you should be given about 40 hours a week in it. Now, I think Waseda has long had a view that bukkatsu and sakura and whatnot are valuable things. So let's assume we let you be a little bit slack on that. So you still should be looking to do, if Waseda study in total is not taking up about 36 hours a week, you're probably not fully with the project. Dead minimum, say 32 hours a week. Okay. Class time with a regular course enrollment is about 12 hours a week. So you can do the sums on that. Okay. So in short, particularly because so many things have stopped this semester, you don't have many excuses for not getting engaged with your courses. Okay. Especially with the group project. So you can disappoint me on the quizzes, but for goodness sake, don't disappoint your group members. Okay. So yeah, that's the 1 month to go speech about how much work you should have been doing. And if you haven't, you've got a bit of catching up to do. Okay. Right. By the way, as you know, my daughter was a SILS student. I know she didn't do that kind of work. So when she did fail courses, I thought zamamiro, although then I had to pay the consequences myself. But that's the way it works. Okay. So a final reminder on the quiz. It turns off 5 o'clock this Friday. Okay. So make sure you get that done. The finance video on demand will come over the weekend. They'll be edited up. Okay. And don't forget the videos online. We have one for finance with Jack Ma, Alibaba, which is talking in broader background about how he got his start in business, which is a hugely interesting story. And also we've got two very good TED Talks. One of them is actually a hugely popular, famous TED Talk by Malcolm Gladwell, very active authors, published a number of hugely interesting books. He has a very enjoyable presentation where he talks about market segmentation, how big companies for so long were making mistaken assumptions about consumer behavior in the United States. And he talks about the whole emerging field of researching consumer tastes. This was back in the 50s and the 60s. So well worth your while, of course. And also Dan Cobley, the other TED Talk there, very interesting. So have a look at them. And I'll be quite explicit. There will be questions about those videos as well in the next quiz that we will do next week. Okay, so now we're going to talk about branding. Okay, now I'll share the poll results with you. So I think almost everybody's done it. Okay, so let me first of all just screenshot it. Okay. For my own reference later on, because the particular subscription that Waseda has to Zoom doesn't allow me to actually export it. So I don't know how that happened, but it's one of the boxes I think they forgot to tick when they were signing up. Okay, so I will end the poll and share the results with you. Okay, so we can see from the top, okay, Waseda's brand's very strong in Japan. Yep, 122 of 152 think. Okay, good. And I guess the others think, seeing you here, get your finger out, do some work, make it a better brand. Okay. When we look down to the bottom, we see that only a third of you think that Waseda manages its brand well. So that's an interesting thing we'll definitely come back to. And let me see, Waseda's brand is a bit weaker than KO's brand. Only about 22% agree. So I think, of course, the kind of peas in a pod in a way, in terms, if we think in terms of Hensachi and whatnot, they're obviously very, very close rivals. If we look in terms of university rankings, kind of KO and Waseda kind of take it in turn, depending on whether it's Toyo Keizai or whatnot. Sometimes in the media, Waseda tends to come a little bit of KO ahead of KO in terms of the rankings. KO professors are very quick to say that that's because so many people in the media are Waseda graduates. So I don't know. On the other hand, Waseda professors will say that actually lots of Waseda graduates have a grudge against Waseda because Waseda didn't treat them very well. And so the Waseda gets bashed more quickly than other universities in the media. So I don't know. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if it's Higai more so. I'm not quite sure. Okay. What I would say, and I think we've seen this very much with COVID-19, is that Waseda is, how should I put this? Very externally engaged, externally oriented. It's very alert to its reputation, justified or unjustified, for being a kind of a first mover or an early mover on various things. And I think collectively in Waseda, at head office level, not at the faculty level, because professors do their own thing, and many of them don't have much patience for branding and whatnot, in a good and a bad way. I think at head office level, there's very much this sense that you want to be a bit ahead of the crowd, a bit ahead of the pack. In finance terms, refer to it as kind of front running. Front running is actually legal. That's actually why Horimon went to prison. But in branding terms, front running is trying to read the direction in terms of, say, a conversation, a national conversation, or a direction of policy, and to move more quickly than the others, so that you get a reputation for being quicker than everybody else, for being speedy. It's not always good. One of the problems is that if you become too externally oriented, you're too anticipative, you can get distracted from substance, from core issues. This is a huge dilemma for creatives, for artists, particularly in our digital age, that if you're constantly looking at the critics, looking at how you're externally received, you can neglect that very reflective process of finding your own distinctive voice, your own creative endeavor, your own approach. Okay, you can end up being much too reflective. You know that old Japanese like happo bijin, you know, and they're kind of looking in 8 directions. Oh, 6, yeah. So that's potentially a problem. I say probably in the hedge my bets and be careful here, but I think in the COVID case, you know, in the Corona case, I think we placed Waseda placed a very heavy emphasis on being seen to move quickly. Whether we followed up in terms of the substance, I mean, I guess that's as much for you guys to draw judgments about. Okay. In terms of Waseda, less exclusive than Tokyo University. Clearly it is in terms of obviously Hensachi and whatnot, but the brand is more attractive than Todai in some respects. About half of you think so. And my own personal view is that I agree with that. Todai, actually, particularly when you look internationally, Todai is very prestigious, of course, and very research active. But Todai also has a reputation for being very inflexible, arrogant, difficult to deal with. And I know from the Australian side, I'm very well connected. And say, for example, Japanese Studies Association and whatnot, actually was secretary of the National Association at one point. I know that generally Australian universities much preferred to deal with both Waseda and Keio rather than Todai. They just found them much better partners to work with. So there are elements in terms of Waseda being more flexible, more liberal, being a private university, less subject to direct controls in the past from, say, Monbusho, Monkajo. So all of those things have kind of helped. So yeah, and generally, of course, a broader, more diverse student life than Todai, okay, for better and worse. Waseda's brand very strong overseas. 9% of you say so. Will be interesting to know where you're coming from. I think Waseda's brand is very strong in several proximate countries, in a subset of, say, the market in China and Korea, partly because there's some very prominent people, Koreans and Chinese in the past, who came to Waseda and been associated with Waseda. And so you can see, you know, Chinese tourists coming onto the campus, for example, and visiting Waseda and taking photographs and whatnot. So, and actually, by the way, in the early 20th century, Waseda, as a proportion of students, was actually more international than it is today. There were a lot of non-Japanese students in Waseda relative to other universities. So it was relatively very liberal and internationally oriented. Waseda's brand is weak overseas. It depends on very much where you're coming from. Amongst people who know Japan and Japanese studies, Waseda has a strong brand. But in many markets, people just haven't heard of Waseda. And I've had 2 separate instances, one an international conference and one a book, which is even worse, where my affiliation was Wasada rather than Waseda. I think they're influenced by Masada, the famous citadel in Israel, with the last stand of a Jewish rebel group after the fall of Jerusalem. They were pursued by the Romans, okay, a group called the Zealots, and that's why we talk about people who are zealots, and they all committed suicide rather than be defeated by the Romans, okay, so that's Masada. So I think people mentally, they just flip the W upside down, and so it's Masada and Waseda, okay. Mind you, those of you who are new first semester students and you took your compulsory introductory course, online course about learning skills and whatnot, which has that really weird computer generated voice. I clicked on it out of curiosity. That is seriously bizarre. They couldn't find a native speaker to actually pre-record those things. And so you've got this computer speaking English and how was it? Waseda or something? They couldn't even pronounce Waseda correctly. And Waseda bought the software to do that. So yeah, that's pretty hilarious, actually. I'm hoping someone kind of does a mashup of that, someone with good DJing skills or something, and turns that into a kind of a techno track. This kind of computer generated lecture. I hope that's not the rationale for why your fees weren't cut, that software was bought. Okay, Waseda manages his brand well. Okay, only about 1/3 think so. That's very interesting. We'll come back to that. Okay. And Waseda could do a better job with its self-branding. About 1/3 think so. So I think the takeaway implication here is about maybe about 1/3 of you kind of neutral. Okay. Increasingly, universities everywhere are very focused on their brands. The brands obviously help to recruit international students, domestic students, and we're seeing in the Japanese context with all the pandemic that actually having a very strong domestic brand is a source of enormous strength. It's a bloodbath in Australian universities now. They've been very dependent on international students, and as international students can't join, huge revenue shortfalls, and faculty members are losing their jobs. Actually, a friend of mine, one of my closest friends, he took a cash offer to finish up this semester to retire early. So he finished up yesterday. As of 1st of July, he's a free agent. Fortunately, he, for family reasons, was financially very comfortable, and it also suited him with a family situation and whatnot. But yeah, it's really, really rough when you have so internationalized and suddenly borders are closed. So a strong domestic brand tends to insulate against that. And we will see that in Australian universities, that they will pick up on domestic students. Although the problem is international students bring something like 2.5 times the revenue that the domestic students do, because the government doesn't fund the domestic student places very well. Of course, the top American universities lead the world in terms of their brand management, their fundraising, their alumni management. And of course, if you're paying $60,000 to $65,000 a year fees for 1 year, as some of those institutions are, that's the sticker price. Of course, lots of people get scholarships. Clearly, you want a very positive brand experience, and they want you subsequently, not only after you've paid that money, to go and become super successful in life and then go and donate millions of dollars back to the institution. So the managing the relationships, keeping the brand very strong are key challenges in American universities. I'd say that generally Japanese universities have kohobu and they're focused on the branding and whatnot. But there is less professionalization of it as a whole, of the whole strategic brand management of universities, even though universities are paying for a lot of advertising and whatnot that we see everywhere. Okay, I'll stop that share on the poll, and I will turn over then to the lecture notes. We'll talk about branding. So I'm running this class off the keynote. Off the PDF, because I've had repeated problems with using Keynote actually freezing up, and so we'll do it this way. Okay. I think a few of you in the class have a German background. Gladwell, that's a German department store. Okay. Let's start off with basic introduction to marketing, 4 Ps. Anyone who's studying marketing elsewhere will be sick and tired of hearing about the 4 Ps. And over time, people have been talking about the 5 Ps, the 6 Ps, the 7 Ps, the 8 Ps, the green Ps. I have a standard joke that you need to know 5 Ps. Okay, the 4 Ps plus Picaria, because I'm the one who decides your grade. Okay, marketing theory, 4 elements in what we call the marketing mix. Product. What product is it? Okay. Price, how much you're going to sell it for. Place, where you're going to sell the thing. Okay. Or the experience. And promotion, how is it sold? So we can unpack all of those things. Each of them are very complex things in their own right. One of the international associations I belong to participate in the annual conferences, although not this year, is the International Place Branding Association. So that actually is thinking about place and how you build place and nation brands. I've got several angles on it. I wrote a doctoral thesis about foreign investment policy, and so I'm focused on, in some sense, on marketing countries and places and cities as investment destinations. So that's one element of it. I'm very much interested in university branding and marketing. And actually, one of my big projects now is actually on the role of the university campus in a virtual age. This is so ironic. This is like COVID-19's almost like an experiment for a research project. It's just awful. But it's been a real prompt to think about these issues, and particularly how the campus experience figures in the way that institutions promote themselves. So, of course, those institutions that want to depict themselves as very storied universities with a long history and exemplifying some of the traditional ideas of the university, it helps if you do have some stone, some brick even, as a compromise, but better stone, but lots of ivy growing on it. Ideally, some medieval looking architecture, such as the University of Chicago, although it was built in the 1880s, to look like it had been around since the 14th century. Okay. So we see this in a lot of places, that institutions either brand themselves as very cutting edge, very contemporary, or very storied, so that the university, for example, we think of as in its time and place, serving a certain society and international community, but also connected intertemporally across time to right back to the ancients in some sense. We'd like to draw a line all the way back to, say, Plato and Socrates and whatnot, and certainly the early formative years of the cloistered universities in the Middle Ages. So it's when you go onto the university campus or you interact with the university brand through any touch point, there is this sense that this is a very distinctive university with a distinctive experience in a distinctive place, but you're also part of something much bigger and something timeless. And striking a balance on those elements is always a challenge. So branding is one part and a consequence of this 4P decision set over product, price, place, and promotion. Okay. Brands offer us assurance, Anshinkan. They give us a confidence to buy something in a hurry. If you don't have time to read all the reviews, to test all the products, for example, if you have to make a very quick decision, buy the brand. We'll see that in the case of Toyota, for example. If your primary concern is simply to have a reliable car and with pretty good resale value, if you want to sell it subsequently, just buy the Toyota. If you are more interested in, say, design and whatnot, you may consider other brands. But Toyota's positioning, one reason why it's so strong, is that it really does represent assurance to people. In a market such as Japan, that's really important. These days, people don't renew their cars for many years. It has one of the longest average lives of cars these days, very different from in the past, where I think it's now about only once every 8 years do consumers actually replace their car. And quite strikingly, they often downgrade. So they had a bigger sedan and then they buy a Keiji Dosha when they replace it. So it's actually in some ways a shrinking market, unlike in China where people, they buy often a second car and they also upgrade to a bigger model. And for the car company, it's actually greater profitability. But of course, brands don't just offer assurance, they offer identity as well too. And there are some people who will choose to buy, for example, a car based more about what it says about them as an identity act and rather less an assurance act. And a simple example, one of my closest mates in high school, the end of high school, when he bought his first car, he bought a secondhand Fiat, a Fiat 127, which was a really cool car, completely and utterly unreliable. I spent so much time pushing it, helping him to fix it, but it looked cool. Okay, driving a Fiat was a cool thing to do. He wanted to say something about his Italianate style. Never mind that it just constantly let him and his mates down when we were trying to drive down to the Gold Coast to go for a surf or something like that. Okay, although it never actually caught fire. My crappy Ford Escort caught fire in the middle of the highway. And it turns out old Fords had a reputation for bad electrics. That's not the kind of brand you want. That's like non-assurance. Okay, so brand power. I think we all understand the significance of brands in some broad sense. Brands are ubiquitous, and this is also a finishing point in this discussion. Brands simplify consumer decisions. They exclude so many options. If we make up our mind about our brand, the brand we want to buy, and then we look at the subset of options that are then presented by that brand, then it is simply going to be a lot quicker for us to make a decision. We may miss out on other good opportunities by doing that, but effectively there is this simplifying of decisions. And the busier you get, in a sense, the more you appreciate this. They reduce search and decision times in an era of profound product complexity. We've got so much choice, we've got information overload. Now, of course, there are lots of review sites we can use with price reviews as well, kakaka.com and whatnot. Although there's always questions of the reliability of the reviewers, the independence, but if the sample size is large enough, it is significant. Although, of course, you may have your own very boutique needs, and so what suits most people may not suit you. In a really significant sense, brands shift responsibility from the buyer. So I made up a quote here. It's like, well, I bought the Toyota, so don't blame me, dear, that we're broken down in the middle of nowhere, okay? If Dad had insisted on buying the Fiat because it was cool, and then it overheated on the highway and all the kids are sweltering in the sun and they can't get to the beach, you know, Dad's in trouble. But if, you know, he bought the Toyota, reluctantly conceded, yeah, I'm a family man, put the family first, and then it breaks down, he kind of feels liberated in a funny kind of way. He says, well, I should have bought the Fiat. You told me to buy the Toyota because it was more reliable and we're still on the side of the road, okay? So you can get that. Brands enhance the status of their customers, okay? But only amongst others who also value that brand. And this is a really complex set of issues. I must admit, and my apologies to anyone whose family drive German cars, I must admit to a huge psychological barrier to buying a particular Mercedes or a BMW, because I just know so many wankers in Australia who drive them, okay? Actually, there is some very interesting research, the most recent one done by a Finnish scholar who found, I think the title of the paper is, I think German car drivers really are assholes, I think is the actual title of the academic paper. So again, if you drive a German car, don't be offended, okay? They are great cars, but there is also a status orientation. There are self-branding and identity issues there that I'd say only a minority, but a sufficient minority of people buy prominent German cars to show that, well, they're a bit better than other people. I go regularly to a swimming club in Yorkshire where, just near Yorkshire Station, Jecks are there, where you're not really supposed to park, but technically you can get away with it. But by parking there, you're in danger of running over all the kids who come to their swimming classes. And I've noticed week after week, month after month, year after year, the only people who ever have the Yiddish expression, the chutzpah, the cheek to actually park there, are drivers of either German cars or Lexus four-wheel drive. No one else kind of does it. That's so there is something there. Okay, everything is branded today, and I'm going to it towards the end of the semester in terms of a wrap-up case study to bring it back to the discussion of the snowboarding, for example. I will show some example about this, the proliferation of brands. But even skateboards, that's a bottom of a skateboard there. You see the different components on the skateboard are branded, okay? Strong brand supports higher prices and adds to the market position of related products. The bicycle industry, for example, there are some very strong brands. The vast majority of bicycles, though, don't have strong brands. They're a commodity product, but the assurance comes from actually putting branded components. So a bicycle brand you've never heard of might have Shimano brakes and gears. And so that critical component for the reliability of the bicycle is branded with a very strong Japanese brand, okay? by the way, one of the most remarkable brands in terms of assurance and its market share is YKK, the Japanese zipper company. Some astonishing market share. And that was built from a time when zippers historically were quite unreliable. You wouldn't imagine this, but when I was a boy, people's zippers used to bust, and it's particularly bad when they're in your school shorts. And nothing worse for any mum or dad who could sew, but generally the mums. My mum's a brilliant sewer, having to replace a zip in some trousers because the zip broke, okay? And then YKK made these incredibly reliable zippers, and they took some astonishing market share. So brands can express values. You know, if you hear Dior, we have associations with Dior: style, elegance, creativity, exclusivity, for example. And then there's questions about how far you extend the brand. When you extend the brand into things like fragrance, it can be hugely profitable, but it can also make the brand more ubiquitous. And we'll come back to that in a moment. Okay, so brands as communications. They communicate focus and values to customers, to manager of the firm, to all employees, to all suppliers, okay? Brands kind of tell you what you do and what you don't do. If you join LVMH, Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, the huge French luxury goods company, headed by a guy called Benoît Arnault, you very quickly learn in LVMH, especially the Louis Vuitton part of the business, we don't do sales. Louis Vuitton does not do sales. The founder, president, CEO of the company says that, if a man buys a handbag for his mum or his girlfriend, he does not want her to see it on sale subsequently. So they do not discount. Okay, it's a pricing strategy, but it's tied very much to their branding position. Okay, that's also one reason why they fight so hard to stop parallel imports, because they really want to preserve prices. It's less about the loss of the profits and more about the fear that the brand will be diminished through being seen to be cheaper, to cheapen the brand. So a significant part of branding is communicating to all of the people inside the organization itself what we do and what we don't do, okay? And so rule of thumb is, you can think of strategy as what you don't do, what you say no to, because it's always tempting to push your brand out, to move into new market segments, to vacuum up cash in the short term, but which can diminish the brand long term. Very famous anecdote on this, Steve Jobs of Apple, and don't forget the video online, Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs of Apple famously told the CEO of Nike, he said, you make some great products and you make some bad products. Stop putting your brand on the bad products. Steve Jobs had this very strong idea that you want to communicate to customers a premium value proposition. You should forego the temptation to make money by putting your brand on your, not necessarily cheaper, but your weaker product. I think this is a lesson that many Japanese companies have been very, very slow to learn. Sony, for example, trying to sell headphones that can sell for 100,000 yen while you're also putting the Sony brand on 500 yen headphones is very much a fraught strategy. So brands are now core firm resources, okay? Brand reputation is usually built slowly and expensively, but damaged quite easily. That's a striking thing. Brands have very, very strong pulling power. They create a demand for the product. The consumers demand renowned products from the retailers. So this is a key thing. The brands literally pull the product through the supply chain, from the manufacturer to the wholesalers to the retailers. Now, if you go to Bikuro or Yodobashi or whatnot, they've got Apple product. They make very little profit off Apple. Apple is tono-sama ego. Apple is like, above heaven. Apple is in an incredibly strong position. They have a strong brand. And those other retailers, they have to sell the product because the customers expect them to sell it, even though they don't make so much money, and they're in a relatively weak position. So this actually allows Apple to be quite hard-headed with their distributors. And you see this recently, for example, an astonishing thing. Retailers have to offer have to display the full range of product. But at certain points in the release of a product cycle, often you can only get the product online direct from Apple. The new Apple SE iPhone, now you can buy in Bitcoin, for example. But when it first came out, although they had display models in BIC, the only way you could buy it was to actually buy it online from the Apple store directly. So by investing in a brand, what this means that you don't have to spend as much money on expensive sales teams running around, bowing, scraping, begging the retailers to stock your product, to say, place your product. It's no accident in supermarkets that some products end up at eye height and others end up down the bottom. That's either done explicitly through paying placement fees, where the seller, the manufacturer of the product, actually pays the supermarket through a rebate to put the product in a more prominent position. Or if it's illegal, then just simple price differentiation. You just simply make the product available more cheaply to the retailer so that they have a higher profit margin. And the quid pro quo, the understanding is that the retailers will then put those brands in a more prominent place. Okay. Now, brands communicate value, a value proposition to a targeted market. Okay. This picture I took a number of years ago in Italy, but it's for Peugeot, a French brand. This was one of the first compact cars that came out with a sliding door. Very good in small Italian cities or very narrow streets and whatnot. Of course, the branding strategy, the communications, but the advertising strategy is going to be very much suited towards its local market and its own values. So if you look at the Italian copy there, it translates from the Italian as a simple car for a complicated woman. Okay. It may translate better and work now in Japan, but this is a few years old. And I remember thinking at the time that particularly no donne complicate. So it's kind of complicated, kind of kimuzukashi, chotto prima donna ne, chotto drama queen poi ne, various implications, okay? Probably not a good way to pitch a car to women in the Japanese market, maybe more so now, but very clearly targeted in the Italian case and very effective. So companies, I think we all basically understand this. Companies have a basic choice between price leadership, selling really standardized goods, low prices, large volume, Uniqlo, okay? Product differentiation, very distinctive goods, higher prices, typically in smaller volumes, and a huge array of fashion brands. Very few firms can achieve both price leadership and differentiation. In the car industry, Toyota is an interesting one because they've been able to create the Lexus, very high quality, premium priced, while also selling lots of Toyota Corolla. For the most part, that's difficult to do. What we do see is companies that are strong in price leadership, but also want to get into premium markets. They will either buy more premium brands and bring them into their stable, or they will invest in creating them. So fast retailing that has Uniqlo, for example, also has Theory. It has Helmut Lang. These are brands that they were bought and were leveraging. Now, historically, a business name typically became a brand. Okay, so if you go to a fish market in Japan or something, you will see this, that these houses, these retailers, very clearly branded. And Japan has some of the earliest history, in a sense, in terms of visual branding of businesses. Stories of origin and place are very significant as well here. So, we see Cartier, that's in French, Depuis, so from 1847. There's a mansion near where I live, and it's got Depuis 2018, which I think is just like truly ridiculous. It's like since 2 years ago. It has to be storied, okay? This, if it's too recent, it's just absolutely kind of ludicrous. And of course, also it leverages place branding. So it's got Paris, London, and whatnot. When I was first a university student, the first time I traveled overseas, actually, I went to Thailand, and there was this interesting business that you could buy, these days completely illegal, well, probably illegal then too, but it was enforced. You could pick your brand, and then so I had Louis Vuitton. I can't believe I'm admitting this, but okay, statute of limitations are up, and it had Paris, London, comma, and then they print in what you wanted. And I was from this, non-prestigious suburb in Brisbane called Capalaba. So I had Capalaba put in, and I'd be walking down the street and people honk their horns and cheer and go, hey, because they like my t-shirt so much. It's kind of putting something incongruous, completely incongruous after Paris, London. You can fill in case I offend someone. I'm not going to pluck some examples from Japan. Okay. So brand portfolios. Large enterprises increasingly have a large portfolio of brands, multiple brands owned by one company. And sometimes they become completely expertise in doing a particular product. They've got the technical know-how and also managing this huge array of brands. Luxottica is probably one of the largest companies most of you have never heard of, okay? They make a huge array of sunglasses. You can see here Persol, Ray-Ban, Oakley, huge array of licensed brands. Far and away the largest player in sunglasses and optical frames in the world. They also own a lot of the retailers. So Sunglasses Hut, for example. A large proportion of the sunglasses stores and stands in airports are directly owned by Luxottica. You go in there and you see 30 or 40 brands, but they're all actually produced by the same company, the license arrangements, and that same company is also running the retail space. So it gives the illusion of competition. One reason why I like Moscot is they are not Luxottica, although I also do like Persol. In the past, I quite like Ray-Ban as well. Okay, now let me have a swig of water. I'm about to cark it, I think. Sorry, cark it, K-A-R-K, means drop dead, okay? I don't know if it's strain English, I don't know where it's come from, but anyway, probably had some of you reaching for your dictionaries. Okay, so segmentation is this key concept, and that's why I want you to watch that video, that TED Talk, which talks about this interesting area called Markowitz and segmentation in the food industry in Japan. Sorry, in the United States, what am I saying? So segments are just, as it's described, in katakana it's often referred to as segmentation, and price discrimination is kakaku, like sametsuka toka. So but segmentation. So understanding that within a general market, there are considerable differences in terms of price sensitiveness and orientation to quality. Haircuts, for example, you can easily pay, even for men's haircuts, 8,500 yen for a 10-shell cut in a very good salon, say Beatrium, or you can get 1,000 yen buzz cut in 10 minutes at one of those places in a station, okay? So very significant variation in price sensitiveness and orientation to quality, okay? Great variation in demand characteristics. Sorry, I lost one into the bracket there. Tastes, values, generations, and whatnot. And also, interestingly and more complicated, different values placed on the same brand. And this is something we will come back to. But one of the implications of segmentation is that you often get companies engaging in what we call versioning, making different versions of a product to tap the different preparedness of consumers to pay. So really hardcore fans of a band, for example, they will pay a very significant premium to get their hands on the product, on maybe a new special edition DVD released early. Maybe you have to be a member of the fan club. You're going to get a poster. You're going to get some product. You might get a chance to win a ticket to a special event or something like that, and you'll pay a higher price for that. So these different versions are ways of effectively capturing as much value as possible in the market. If you just simply go for one price, you're going to miss out on a whole bunch of earning opportunities from customers who are actually prepared to pay a higher price. Okay, so this segmentation is a key strategy for companies. And if you're not going to do multiple products, you have to decide your positioning, okay? Where are you going to be in the market? What segment are you going to target? So strategic choices over branding, pricing, and product mix, okay? So firms will often choose not to compete in some segments. Some reasons include very intense competition, so relatively low margins. You get out of that business, leave it to others. Particularly if you don't have a cost advantage because you're the largest producer, for example, or the technically most efficient producer, you might leave the low margin, low profit business to others. Technological prowess, your technology might be more or less advanced, okay? You may be premium positioning of the brand. We don't see premium brands putting their names on fragrances that they then allow to be sold in truck stops, gasoline stands, okay? International airports, yes. Although I do like to sometimes a little bit cruelly refer to airport brands, and there is this danger that you end up being one of those kind of ubiquitous brands that you see always in airports, which the traveling lawyers and accountants want to wear, but the true cognoscenti, the people in the know, wouldn't be seen with. I can think of Hermes actually has put themselves in this position with those Hermes ties and scarves and whatnot. Tumi luggage, for example, I look at Tumi and I think, chotto, shuchochu no kaishain, no. So I couldn't quite bring myself to buy it, although it's actually a good product, but they've just kind of positioned themselves in a certain way. And so a lot of this comes down to, is it people like me, or, you know, people with my tastes tend to buy this product? And this is one of the biggest dilemmas. You can lose control of your brand positioning if you chase various markets. And it's very difficult to pull it back once it's been positioned in a certain market. Now, given that there's just so much product out there and even more communications about products, you have to cut through. You have to get people's attention. So you have to ask, what's your unique selling proposition? And personal branding too. This is hugely important. If you're not just if you're a YouTuber or a vlogger, just in general, to distinguish yourself, think about what is your unique selling proposition. Now, from a communications point of view, there's a huge advantage to being best in category and to kind of owning that category or dominating that category. The implication here is that you have to find a segment in which you can offer a distinctive value proposition. And this is actually well understood in so many domains, even things like collector behavior and whatnot, that people realize that they can't afford to start collecting art of a certain genre. So they start collecting something which gets less attention, and they become very maniac about something which is cho minor. But that becomes the unique kind of positioning. And, you know, the economics of social media shows this, that people can end up with huge following, monetizing their YouTube videos, for example, talking to very narrow communities. One of my cousin's sons, ever since he's been young, he's been really into garbage trucks. He's really into garbage trucks, and he puts these pretty cool garbage truck videos up on YouTube. He's really into it, and he's got a small but very dedicated following of people who are into garbage trucks. And, you know, that's what he does, you know. So he's found his category, and he's going to be number one in his category, and good luck to him, okay? So one of our challenges, I think, is to really think about what are our strengths? Where can we credibly present ourselves as different, as adding a unique value proposition? And I invite you to kind of reflect on that. You may be thinking, yeah, what's Baccaria's story on that? And it's painful when you have to confront this. I guess my own story is probably what I'm good at is actually joining up very disparate things, finding in a very synergistic kind of way, going into multiple disciplinary fields and connecting it with a unique perspective and then sharing that and applying it. So academically, that's what I tend to do. I tend to do more multidisciplinary things. And that's also why I came to work in SILS. I used to be in a business school. Many of my business school colleagues were very narrow, focused on one aspect of business, very quantitative research. I had very diverse interests, easily criticized as a jack of all trades and a master of none, but I realized my kind of curiosity and my enthusiasm was my distinct value proposition. And so, yeah, liberal arts faculty and a place that gives me enormous freedom to collaborate with people in different fields. And so you'll find, if you look at my research, you know, a whole bunch of things, you know, collaborating with economists, management theorists, architects, designers, and whatnot, and that's good. And that's what I do. Okay, so it's the boundaries of where different fields meet. So try and find this unique spot for yourself. Now, if you're a company doing this, you know, you also have to convince customers that you should value this category that you've now positioned yourself strongly in. It's like Crazy Ronnie I met from Israel, who is the Israeli #1 rope walking champion. It was pretty easy to become #1 because no one else was doing it, first of all. But then he went and created a community and he became a real pioneer. And yeah, no, Ronnie is kind of legendary. Ronnie, the Israeli rope walker, is now kind of based in Berlin. So kind of good luck to him. But he recruited so many people to the rope walking thing. And so he's a pioneer too. And so we see this, and that's why the snowboarding case is so interesting. You get these two people, intense rivals, different backgrounds, who both share a vision, but a contending vision for the potential for snowboarding. And they're very active. They become pioneers. They get lots of followers. And this whole ecology of business arises up around them. People making the boards, the bindings, convincing the ski fields to even allow them to be in the ski fields. All of these kind of interesting dynamics. And now we see that the industry has overtaken skiing in terms of its popularity. Okay, so a very important point though, one of the hardest things to do in life is to convince someone else that they are wrong. Generally don't even try. The better thing to do is just add to their frame. Say, okay, radio, yep, Toyota, most reliable car, but hell, you live in Tokyo. You're never on a dark road. You've always got a phone. You're never more than 5 minutes walk from help. And modern cars almost never break down anyway. You know, if you were living in outback Australia and it's 500 kilometers to the next town, yeah, buy the Toyota. I certainly would. But if you're living in Tokyo, you got to look cool. So you should be driving a Nissan GTR or a Z or something, okay? Something that projects a bit more style, okay? Then there's this broader set of brand preservation issues. Let's say you've built your brand, constant danger of success, bringing brand dilution. Be very wary if you go to invest in things that have a short life. Things that very quickly burst onto the scene are hugely popular, but are in great danger of dating. I mean dating in a sense by becoming like furukusai. I mean, for one, as a thought bubble, I would think TikTok came from nowhere, hugely popular, but it's a one-trick pony, you know. There's only so much you can do with TikTok with that particular form. And it may also become indelibly associated with 2020 and the pandemic and all the rest of it. So not sure that precisely because it's so popular that it can last. Dolce & Gabbana, very famous Italian brand, they have really paid a price in some markets, you know, such as France, and for making decisions to have accessible products. Some of you might know the classic D&G belt buckle. Now this was a relatively cheap product to buy. D&G, very big, as the English would say, rather naff. Okay. And so it's very much damaged their brand. As a Parisian friend of mine said, if you wear a D&G belt buckle, you look like a drug dealer. Okay, which was the kind of the nasty comment. Copenhagen friends said that's the same problem with Audi. That if you drive an Audi, you look like a drug dealer. So this is, you know, it becomes popular in a subculture and very difficult to reposition the brand as a consequence. Okay. So the brand extension thing, you have to be careful about how you push it out. Having a portfolio of brands is one way to get at this. But if the brand is too ubiquitous, if it's everywhere, you know, Versace, for example, they even moved into hotels. There's a Versace resort on the Gold Coast in Australia, homewares and whatnot, then people may get, well, sick of it. So we do see that brands are very, very much associated with a particular product expand into other lineups. Like Todd's, very good shoes. You go into a Todd store these days, lots of handbags. Onitsuka Tiger, which was their original brand, and then Asics became their international brand, but then Onitsuka Tiger had this great retro brand value, and particularly the made in Japan, hugely popular. So if you go into an Onitsuka Tiger store, and there are a number of them in Tokyo now, they've got a whole lineup of clothing and whatnot as well. There's always the danger of brand dilution with this overextension. Okay, so a lot of tactical issues arise and licensing issues, which are beyond the discussion here. Keep in mind when you start a business and you start it small, assume this is going to succeed. So make sure you get the naming right in the first place. A lot of people are lousy. They don't bother registering the business names or registering the .com or stuff like that. Then your business succeeds. And then someone else owns your .com. You can register a .com for $15 US a year, even cheaper with some registrations. So make sure you get the .com before you fix the name. In this case, well, they got rooty.jp, but you're not going to take that internationally. And I'm not going to explain why, but it's got rude implication in English. So in essence, what is marketing? Okay, very broad. It's assessing consumer demand. Market research is a key thing. It's product planning, packaging, branding, pricing. Advertising is only a small part of it, but a significant part. It is the distribution and the selling. It's also public relations. It's actually selling the company as well. So marketing is just critical to corporate strategy. In terms of distribution, again, I'm not going to go into detail, but Durex is a very famous brand. This is a particular product that you mostly need it when the shops are shut, okay? And it's also very embarrassing to buy. Even more embarrassing to explain to mum and dad why they're going to be grandparents. So it's probably good to overcome your embarrassment rather than end up in that situation. So, of course, basic distribution, we see this very common in Europe, vending machines for contraception, okay? Because you need to be able to put the product where people can buy it when they need it. By the way, when I was the vice president of the student union at the University of Queensland many, many years ago, this was a huge issue about whether we allowed contraceptive vending machines on campus or not. Lots of people said that it was a very immoral thing to do. Pretty quite bizarre in hindsight when you think about it. Anyway, advertising, the simple descriptor about advertising, you can think of it as bought attention. Okay, you're actually paying for the space and hopefully getting the attention. Okay, and of course it makes a lot of sense. You know, customers have to find and know your product. Okay, mass marketing can be very expensive, but it has that payoff, as we saw. If you build your brand, you can very often save money on a sales force that otherwise have to get out there and push your product. And so, of course, we see more and more targeted marketing. This is focused on that segmentation we talked about, and particularly with social media, viral marketing, using target audience itself to actually spread the message. This is when you really hit the spot, the sweet spot, when your target audience likes your message so much that they voluntarily share it with other people. And so you kind of sit back, you know, we look at COVID-19 pandemic, but if you can, in a positive way, you know, so we think about virus horrible, but, you know, if you get your message to spread virally, it can have a huge impact very quickly. So literally brands can come from nowhere and become the latest hot thing. Public relations is different, okay? Public relations is really about earning attention. This is about profiling, speaking to medias, key opinion influencers, broadly general, always sounds like influenza to me, influencers, okay? So it very often promotes the firm in addition to the brands, and they're not the same thing as we saw. It often has a crisis communications component. It has an investor relations component, speaking directly to investors. And I would encourage SILS students who've got a bit of interest in finance to think about investor relations as an angle. So if you do some branding, marketing, and you do a bit of finance, it's a very powerful combination, particularly because, say, for example, here in Tokyo, a significant part of the investor community are foreign firms, gaishike. And so much of the investor relations is done in English. So if you're bilingual, understand a bit of finance, done some branding, it can be a powerful combination. Government relations, of course, dealing with stakeholders in so many industries, this is critical. The airline industry now, you know, you've got to be talking to government. Bailouts, border openness, so many issues now with COVID-19, for example. And of course, rivals for public attention are everywhere, not just the rival firms. When you're trying to get attention to get your message across, actually, you're much more worried about some completely unrelated thing happening and distracting people's attention. The flip side of that is if you really want to drop bad news, drop it late on a Friday night where nobody pays any attention. So to finish up, and looking at time, I think bang on time, okay. We can think of branding as absolutely ubiquitous. Brands are everywhere. If you look around, you've got literally dozens of branded products in your possession, okay? And with social media and whatnot, we have become brands ourselves, whether we like it or not. And so in the end, we have to kind of curate ourselves. We have to manage our own brands. We have to be very aware about how we build our reputation slowly, and one false step, we can spectacularly damage our brands. And I think that's one of the most disconcerting things about social media now, and what is being described as cancel culture. And that, you know, one poorly worded tweet, for example, if you're accused of being prejudiced, you know, racist or whatever, you know, this notion that you get canceled, that you become persona non grata. And companies have been extremely reactive, and they're often very quick to fire people. And if anyone's interested in this, there's an author called Mark Ronson, okay? No, sorry, Mark, no. That's a great message. No, John Ronson. Okay, Mark Ronson's pretty cool. John Ronson, okay, John Ronson, J-O-N-R-O-N-S-O-N. And he wrote a great book called So You've Been Publicly Shamed. And he went and interviewed lots of people who'd been attacked in social media for some mistake, who'd lost their jobs. And he was kind of expected to find a year later that they had recovered and that life was okay, they'd moved on. And the really shocking conclusion from his book was no, they were still suffering, they were still stigmatized. So in a funny kind of way, it's like what we saw people, writers such as Jane Austen talking about in the late 18th, early 19th century, about a woman's reputation in the past. A young woman could easily damage her reputation in society with one false step. Well, now that was the particularly hypocrisy of old conservative societies. These days, of course, it applies to companies and individuals profoundly. So we build our reputation slowly and we damage them very easily. Hence, crisis communications as a critical component of public relations. And those of you taking my designing corporate communications, that's going to be one of our final topics. Okay, I'm looking at time. We're just at time. Yeah, I think we're spot on time. So we'll leave it there. Next week, I think we'll open up just by getting you to share your thoughts on Waseda brand. So just a little bit of a homework, okay? We'll use the chat function. So think of some words which capture Waseda's brand strengths, and maybe think of where Waseda could do better in terms of its branding. So we'll start off with a little bit of a kind of ideating share through the chat function next week. So thank you very much, folks. And yeah, stay dry. This weather is really, really, really grim. Cheers.